You won't get my house as long as I'm breathing, Brian. This isn't just walls. It's my blood, my labor, my life. That's exactly what I forced out through my teeth when I realized my own children had long since stopped seeing me as their father. I had become an object to them, real estate with gray hair. Until recently, I thought old age was about loneliness, about sipping tea by the window, about memories no one wants to hear. But now I know, old age is when your own children turn into predators and you become their prey. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I built this house with my own hands. Every beam, every board, I can remember their texture by touch. Here, Mary and I raised our children, laying down life brick by brick. And now it's just an asset my kids have already sold in their minds. It all started with an innocent call on Labor Day. I was sitting in my chair, drinking coffee when the phone rang. It was Josh, my grandson, Celeste's boy. "Hey, Grandpa," he said cheerfully. "Mom says you pretty much signed everything over to Uncle Brian already? Too bad. I thought I might live there after college." My fingers clenched the mug. I felt hot coffee burning my skin, but it was nothing compared to the sting of his words. I hadn't signed over anything to anyone. That was the first warning. After the call, I went to my workshop, my refuge. I lifted the lid of an old toolbox and pulled out a folder with papers. Everything was in place. No powers of attorney, no receipts. I had always kept control. Or, I thought I had. That evening I called Brian. He picked up after 6 rings, sounding fake surprised. "Dad, hey, what's up? Josh says you've already signed something over to yourself?" "Huh?" He laughed. "No, of course not." He must have gotten it wrong. Kids, you know how they are. But I heard the falseness. His voice was too light, too forced, like he was hiding irritation or guilt. I hung up and stared into the darkness for a long time. What if I really had become nothing more than an old man sitting on square footage? I decided not to panic, but I would keep my eyes open from now on. That very night, lie in the silence, I spoke the words aloud for the first time. You won't get my house as long as I'm breathing. The next morning, I found a paper in my mailbox that changed everything. A paper I definitely hadn't put there. The next morning, I stepped outside for the newspaper. September had already begun to bite the air with its chill, the leaves by the porch crunching under my boots like brittle secrets. I opened the mailbox, and along with senior targeted ads and yet another electric bill, I pulled out an envelope with no stamp and no postmark. Nothing unusual, except for one fact. It was a copy of a petition for temporary guardianship, with my name on it, with Brian's signature, and with the seal of the Hennepin County Court. At first, I thought a mistake, a mix-up, but right at the top was my full name, Harold James Bennett. And worse, the petition claimed I was losing orientation in daily life, unable to manage finances, and that the family concerned for my safety. I sat down right there on the porch, the envelope trembling in my hand, not from the wind, from rage. So that's why Brian had shown up so suddenly a couple of weeks ago, with his caring smile, his offer to help around the house. That's why he walked so confidently into my study. He wasn't visiting. He was scouting. I picked up the phone. My finger hovered over the call button, but I stopped. No, not now. I was too angry to think straight. Instead, I ran the paper to my old printer and made a copy. The original I hid under a floorboard in the workshop, next to my dog tag. My instincts were kicking in. If the enemy is near, you recon first, then strike. That evening, I staged a little theater, cooked a roast, bought his favorite whiskey, and invited Brian over for dinner like old times. He was, of course, delighted. "Dad, I'm glad you're finally relaxing a little." He poured himself a second glass, unaware I had a recorder hidden inside a coffee tin on the shelf. "Yeah," I said, watching him take a sip. "Funny thing, though, found a strange letter in the mailbox this morning. Somebody out there seems to think I can't take care of myself." He froze. His hand with the glass hung midair. Then came the strained smile. "Well, you know, it's standard procedure. to make things easier for you. I just thought, in case something ever happens, you've always been the careful one, Brian. He didn't realize I was no longer the victim. The next day, a man in uniform knocked on my door, a fire inspector with a warrant for inspection, and a complaint filed anonymously. The next day, exactly at 10:12 a.m., the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, thought maybe a courier or a neighbor, but instead, there was a man in uniform, helmet under his arm, badge on his chest, and a cold, detached face. The kind of face meant for fires, not old men in their own homes. Good morning. I'm Inspector Schaefer, County Fire Marshal. We received an anonymous complaint. They say there may be safety violations here. May I inspect the house? His tone was calm, official, but his eyes avoided mine, like a man who knows he's being used. I felt a strange mix of irritation and pity for him, just another cog in someone else's plan. I nodded. Come in. I trust you've got a warrant. He handed me the paper. Everything by the book. The complaint filed out of concern for the well-being of an elderly resident. No handrails on the stairs, possible gas leaks, overloaded circuits. All the usual boilerplate, written by someone who had clearly never set foot in my kitchen. We went through the house. He snapped pictures in the basement, peered into cupboards, jotted notes by the outlets. His tablet chimed each time he checked off another item, like he was working from a script already prepared. You don't have handrails on these steps, he said by the staircase. That's a violation when the resident is over 70. I took them down to repaint. They're in the garage. You can check. He nodded, typed it in. I felt a chill spreading through my chest. This wasn't just an inspection. It was an attack, disguised as concern. When he left, I stood in the doorway, gripping the wooden frame until my knuckles went white. One thought pounded in my head. They're playing the long game, and I'm the target. I dialed Celeste's number. She picked up almost instantly. Hi, Dad. How are you feeling? Better than you'd like. An inspector came by. Strange. Who could be so concerned? Dad, I don't know anything about that. You do. And if you ever interfere in my life anonymously again, the next time you call me will be through a lawyer. Silence. Then a short beep. I hung up first. Not because I wanted to, because if I listened any longer, I wouldn't have held back. That evening, I pulled out a notebook I hadn't touched since Vietnam. It smelled of mold, leather, and old decisions. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one Mary and I once used for family breakfast, and began to write, plan, clarify legal status, document everything for court, trust no one, not even those who share your name, find allies, turn their game into mine. I didn't know how it would end, but I knew where to start, with those who hadn't betrayed me, with those who still remembered what honor meant. My past held more than concrete and nails. I opened an old box of letters, yellowed envelopes, faded ink, and among them one, still sealed with crooked handwriting, to Harold, forgive me, Joe. My heart jolted. Joe, my younger brother, the one I hadn't spoken to in 25 years. We'd fallen out back in 2000. Over what? Pride. And now, after a quarter century, here he was, writing to me. If you're reading this, it means I've decided. I'm coming. And if you don't turn me away at the door, we can finally talk. That's how the letter ended, which meant he was already on his way. The day was cool, but the sun kept breaking through the clouds, as if it couldn't decide whether it should light up this meeting. I stood by the porch, an old mug of tea in my hand, a storm inside me. On the driveway appeared an old, dust-covered Ford Focus, scratched, with a dented front bumper. Behind the wheel, Joe, my younger brother, once my best friend, my first enemy, the one I made for myself. I hadn't seen him in 25 years. The last time we spoke was at our father's funeral. Then came the fight over the land. He wanted to sell our shared property, and I refused. Words piled on words. Raised voices. Regrets left unsaid. Pride, resentment, silence. Years. And now here he was, parked in front of my house, gripping the wheel as if asking for permission just to step out. I took a sip of tea and gave him a nod. He climbed out of the car, circled it slowly, looking at the house. His face had aged, but his eyes were the same. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "You've gotten older, Harry." "And you're still late," I answered, my voice shaking just a little. We both laughed, too briefly to forget, but long enough to admit we were both to blame. I stepped back and invited him inside. And for the first time in years, someone crossed my threshold who didn't wish me dead. Not literally, not legally. In the kitchen, it was quiet. Even the ticking of the clock seemed loud. I set a cup in front of him, just like the old days, and asked, "Why did you write to me?" He turned the cup in his hands, as if searching for the answer in the tea. "Because I realize we're getting old. And with age comes not only pain, but understanding. I remembered us fishing together, you building me a bird feeder in the backyard." Then Josh reached out to me. "Josh, your grandson. He said the family's up to something. Said you're alone. That Brian's already got most of the paperwork in his name, and Celeste's filing complaints with inspectors. Harry, they've already buried you. They just didn't bother to set a date." I lowered my eyes. The fact that my grandson had the courage to say this meant more than he probably realized. And the fact that Joe didn't ignore it meant even more. "Joe," I said, "they want the house. They're already trying to cut me out legally. Forging signatures, calling in inspectors. I found guardianship papers. Yesterday the fire marshal came. Celeste, anonymous." He listened in silence. Looked me in the eyes the way he once did when we sat in the trenches, bullets screaming overhead. Then he asked, "What do you want to do?" "I want them to regret ever mistaking me for a fool. I want them to remember what respect means." He smirked, nodded, and said, "Remember Willie? Our sergeant in Vietnam? He works on cameras and security systems now. We still keep in touch. He's old, but his hand doesn't shake. I'll ask him to come. We'll do this right. You think it'll work?" "I think, Harry, you spent your whole life building houses. But now it's time to build something else, traps." 3 days later, a shadow moved by the back door. On the monitor Joe had hooked up to my old TV. It was clear. Brian was rummaging through the drawers in my study. We installed cameras in every corner of the house. Joe moved like a seasoned technician. Compact lenses hidden in a clock, on a bookshelf, even inside the vents. He worked with the calm confidence of someone who had already been under fire. Willie, our old sergeant, had sent us the equipment along with a hand-drawn wiring diagram. "The model's old but reliable. Just like us," he wrote. And once again I understood. Brotherhood born in dirt and fire doesn't rust. On the third day, I sat in front of the old television Joe had hooked up to the video feed. The screen flickered, and there it was. My study, my desk, folders, papers, the old lamp, everything in its place. I could almost hear the ticking of the desk clock in my head, even though the feed had no sound. And then movement. Brian. He slipped in quietly like a thief. I froze. He looked around, as if he could feel someone might be watching. Then he went straight to the desk and began methodically opening drawers. Like a man who knew exactly what he was after, I watched him pull out my folder of bank statements. He opened it. Quick, careless, but precise. Photographed each page, then neatly put it back. Not even a bead of sweat. I clenched my fist so hard my nails dug into my palms. Inside I was boiling, not from betrayal, but from his cold-bloodedness. This wasn't impulse. This was planned, calculated, practiced. Joe watched the screen in silence. Only the corner of his mouth twitched. "That's all we need," he said quietly. "Video, timestamp, face. We've got proof of intent. And no social worker alive can wash that away." I didn't answer, just stood up and walked outside. Autumn was stripping the leaves from the trees. The air smelled of smoke and rotting apples. It felt like it wasn't the wind moving to the pines, but truth itself finally stepping out of the shadows, tearing away the false leaves from my life. That evening, I opened the same drawer where the folder had been, and I placed another one there, filled with forged statements. Professionally forged. I wanted him to come back. I wanted him to dig his own grave, thinking he was digging mine. 2 days later, Brian returned. Same routine, the study, the drawer, the photos. But this time, the fake. And 3 hours later, the bank called me. Mr. Bennett, we received an unusual request on your account. Could you confirm, are you really planning to transfer funds into an investment account in Arizona? I smirked. My voice was calm, steady, like the day I took the oath. No, I said, but I'd be very interested to know who's giving those orders in my name. Then you should come in. We'll record it as attempted fraud. You can file an official complaint. I thanked him and hung up. Then I went back to the TV, rewound the footage, froze the frame where Brian looked straight into the camera, not knowing it was there. It wasn't just a look. It was the face of a man who thought he'd already won. I leaned closer to the screen and whispered, "Welcome to my trap, son." That same evening, another call came. A woman introduced herself as the director of an upscale nursing home. She congratulated me on finalizing the contract. Turned out my children had already reserved me a room. When the phone rang, I didn't recognize the number at first. The woman's voice was polite, smooth, the kind you hear from bank consultants or insurance agents. But the meaning behind her words was chilling. "Mr. Bennett, this is Julie Raines, director of Golden Vista Retirement Home. Congratulations, we received all the paperwork and payment confirmation. Your room is ready, and we'll be expecting you on Monday. If you'd like to tour the room beforehand, we'd be happy to arrange a visit." My heart froze. I hadn't reserved anything, and I certainly hadn't paid. My children had done it, behind my back, without my consent. Brian, Celeste, or both. This wasn't care. This was deportation. Into a comfortable prison under the sign of assisted living. "Excuse me," I replied, "but I haven't signed any contract. Who gave you these documents?" "We have a power of attorney on your behalf, signed by your son. Everything looks correct. Send me a copy. And please, cancel everything. I'm not moving anywhere." "Of course, but I'm afraid cancellation is only possible with your personal signature. We'll need your official statement. Otherwise, the payment is non-refundable. Believe me, I'll come in person, and I'll handle this personally." I hung up and looked at Joe. He'd already heard everything. We had the call on speaker. "They don't just want to get rid of you, Harry," he said. "They're staging the final act. But it won't be their act." The next morning, we drove to Golden Vista. Grand facade, fountains, glass doors, just like in the brochures. On the outside, luxury. Inside, the weight of helplessness. They offer us a tour of the facility, a smiling manager in a lavender suit talking about the active longevity program and personalized nutrition. The room was small. No windows facing south. One bed, a plastic table. A TV bolted to the wall. No tools, no memories. A cage painted beige. Comfortable but hollow. A space without history. A place where living people are shelved like folders in an archive. It's like a sanatorium. I muttered, "Only forever." I picked up a copy of the documents. The signature. Forged. The handwriting looked close to mine, but it wasn't. Too steady. Missing the crooked bend in the G. I knew immediately. Celeste. She'd always practiced faking my signature on school notes. Now she was practicing on my life. We thanked them, as expected. I even smiled, not to give myself away. War teaches patience. Patience and cold fury. In the car, I felt anger pounding in my temples. "They've decided to pack me into a living box," I said. "Then it's time to break out the box from the inside," Joe replied, "and show them who still knows how to dig the graves. All they want is for me to disappear. But now I'll make them see me every day. On the screen, in court, at the bank, in their nightmares." And on their video recordings, Joe added, "Because we've only just started writing your version of the story." The next day, the bank called me. Someone had tried to access my account again, but this time through a forged power of attorney. And the name on the request was a familiar one, Celeste Bennett. When I picked up the phone and heard the word mortgage, a chill ran down my spine. The bank employee spoke in a neutral, almost apologetic tone. "Mr. Bennett, we're just confirming. Are you in fact applying for a second mortgage on your house through our online platform? Excuse me, what? We received a power of attorney filed under your daughter's name, Celeste Bennett. According to the documents, she has the authority to act on your behalf. She initiated the loan application secured against your property. We only need your confirmation. I didn't shout. I didn't explain. I simply said, put everything on hold. This is fraud. I'll come in personally. And I hung up. Then I stood, without a word. Joe understood just from the look on my face. What happened? She tried to take out a loan against my house, forge a power of attorney. She wants to drain the money from this place while I'm still alive. Then it's time to hit back. I felt anger filling me not as a burst, but as a heavy weight. Not fury, steel. I knew that if I didn't stop them now, tomorrow they'd forge the will, or pay off a doctor to declare me incompetent. We drove to the bank. A massive glass building, polished to perfection, not a speck of dust, just like the faces of the people working there. I carried a folder with me, my original passport, the deed to the house, a notarized letter revoking all previous powers of attorney, and my final was signed by Mary before her death, where she asked to keep the house in the family, but not at any cost. I insisted on a personal meeting with the head of security. His name was Peter Gray. Tall, silver-haired, with the look of someone who had seen a lot. He listened carefully, too carefully, like a man who suspected something rotten inside his own bank. We'll check everything, he promised. But I can tell you right now, the power of attorney you've brought and the one filed in the system don't match. We'll notify the legal department. I thanked him and added, if my daughter ever uses my name again, you'll be served. The next call will come from the prosecutor. Peter nodded. Mr. Bennett, judging by your voice, I wouldn't argue with you. On the way home, we were silent. Only when the car pulled into familiar Pine Line Drive did Joe finally say, she was the quietest of them all, wasn't she? When she was little, yes, but then she learned that words can be weapons. Only now she's moved further. Now she works with a scalpel, quiet, straight into the flesh. At home, I sat in Mary's chair, her knitted blanket still draped across the back. I ran my fingers over the patterns and suddenly realized there was no pain left in me, only purpose. They were no longer family. They were clients of a hostile firm, with my life as collateral. That night, Joe and I reviewed everything, the cameras, the documents, the options. We began drafting a list, steps, evidence, witnesses. Harold Bennett was no longer just an old man. I was becoming the accuser, the plaintiff, the memory that strikes back. The following week, I invited the whole family for dinner. All of them. Grandchildren, children. For dessert, I wouldn't be serving cake. I'd be serving video. And a summons. I invited everyone for Sunday. No one was surprised. On the contrary, Celeste sent a text. How nice that you're trying to reconnect, Dad. Brian called and offered to bring wine. I said, it'll be better if you come empty-handed. The house smelled of roasted meat and cinnamon. Mary would have been proud. Joe helped in the kitchen. The grandkids ran around the yard. On the surface, it all looked like a commercial. Family, evening, food. But underneath lay a mine. I sat at the center of the table, like a smoldering fire, not bright, but burning hot. Inside me, molten steel. The table was covered with dishes, but no one really ate. My children traded polite phrases, rehearsed smiles. The grandkids mumbled something about school. Joe poured tea, but everyone knew this was no ordinary dinner. I'm glad we're all together. I began, this isn't just a gathering. This is an evening of truth. Dad, you're scaring us. Celeste smirked. I just want you to see something. I pressed the remote, and the television lit up. First, static, then an image. My study. Brian, his face. His hands rifling through my papers. A close-up of bank statements. And the audio, his voice on the phone. He won't even notice. The key is to get it all done before winter. After that, it'll be too late. If anything, I'll just say he signed it himself. Silence. Dead silence. As if the very air had frozen. Celeste went pale. Brian stared at the screen, as if he'd seen a ghost. "This is fake," he said, but his voice cracked. "We have all the recordings. Different days. Different cameras. Different angles." I stood up. This wasn't a dinner. This was an interrogation. "Your turn to speak, my children." Celeste lowered her eyes. Brian clenched his fists. Joe pushed his chair back, but stayed silent. This was my fight. "You have no right to treat us this way." Brian shouted. "And you had the right? When you tried to shove me into a nursing home. When you filed forged powers of attorney. When you, Celeste, practiced faking my signature back in school?" She raised her head. Her lips trembled. "I just wanted things under control. You're getting old. You mix up days. Sometimes you forget to lock the door. And you forgot this is my house. My life. My signature." Silence. The grandkids sat in the corner. One of them, Josh, looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. His eyes shone. It wasn't fear. It was respect. He understood. I laid a folder on the table. Inside, letters, documents, printouts, video stills. Everything Joe and I had gathered over the past weeks. Every page, a nail in the coffin of their scheme. This is a dossier. Not on you, on your actions. And now you decide, are you my children or my enemies? They left in silence. Didn't even say goodbye. Only Josh stayed behind. He came up to me, hugged me, and said nothing. 2 days later, Celeste came back. But not alone. She brought a lawyer and tried to break OpenSafe. She came in the middle of the day. No call ahead. Just stood on the porch like she owned the place and knocked on the door. Beside her, a man in a suit, carrying a briefcase, a tablet, and an icy expression. A lawyer. Thin tie, hard eyes. Not someone who came to talk. Someone who came to take. I opened the door. Joe stood by the staircase, watching like a shadow. "We've come for what rightfully belongs to the family," Celeste said. "Then you should have come with repentance, not with a lawyer. We want to open the safe. There may be documents you're deliberately hiding from a family. A will, banking agreements, maybe even falsified deeds." I wanted to laugh, but didn't. Instead, I stepped aside and said, "Come in." We entered the study. That study, the safe, old, built into the wall, hidden behind a bookcase. Its door bore faint scratches from the days when the kids used to play find the secret spot. No one but Mary and I knew the code. And now, Joe as well. The lawyer started speaking in legal jargon. Something about voluntary access, about the rights of relatives in cases of questionable mental state of the owner, about the interests of potential heirs. I cut him off. "You're claiming I'm mentally incompetent?" "We're claiming there are grounds to believe dash." "That's enough," I interrupted. I pulled out a document from the drawer, a medical certificate from both a therapist and psychiatrist, fresh, stamped, and signed. Joe had arranged it all in advance. 2 independent doctors. The sessions recorded on video. In black and white it read, "Harold Bennett is fully sane and sound. Actions coherent. Speech logical. Memory stable." I placed the paper on the desk. And next to it, a flash drive. Here's a copy of what's inside the safe. Videos, documents, letters. Copies have been uploaded to the cloud and also sent to my brother's law firm in 3 different states. If you open the safe without a court order, you'll be breaking the law and facing criminal charges. This isn't a threat. It's protocol. The lawyer stayed silent. Celeste trembled. Her lips went white. I could see the fury inside her, not because I was lying, but because I was 1 step ahead. "I will not let you destroy what I've built. Not from outside. Not from within." "You can't just erase us, Dad," she shouted. "That's not fair. We're your children." "I'm not erasing anyone." "You erase me. First from your conversations, then from your decisions, then from your lives. Now it's my turn to write the reply." I pressed a button under the desk. Joe had installed a hidden system, motion-triggered. The camera switched on. It recorded everything, word for word. Faces, gestures, evidence. The lawyer understood. He took Celeste by the arm and led her to the door. She turned back, whispering, "This isn't over." "I know," I said. "The ending will be mine, and it won't come on your terms." I closed the door behind them, slowly, with effort. But inside, there was a strange calm. At last, I was playing on equal ground. The next day, I received a court summons. Celeste had filed to have me declared legally incompetent. The final battle was approaching. The summons arrived in the morning. The envelope, official, bearing the state seal. Inside, the accusation. In connection with the possible incompetence of citizen Harold Bennett, a hearing has been scheduled. I read the line over and over. Not from shock, from fury. This wasn't just an attack. It was an attempt to erase my identity, to strike me out of life legally. I sat at the table. Joe silently handed me a pen and a notebook. We began writing. Not a statement, a speech. For court, no unnecessary pathos. Just facts. We gathered dates, documents, videos. We added photographs, audio, screenshots of messages, even old letters from Mary where she wrote about our plans to keep the house for the grandchildren. We packed it all into a folder labeled, "My name is Harold." The hearing was scheduled for a week later. A small courtroom, wooden benches, the smell of old paper and cheap air freshener. Everything reeked of bureaucracy, slow, cold, but deadly precise. I wore the suit I'd worn at my wife's funeral. Not because I was in mourning, because this was war. Celeste sat on the left, in a strict dress, but with a cold expression. Beside her, her lawyer. Brian didn't come. Cowardice is a family trait, but it shows itself differently in each of us. I stood when the judge entered, a man in glasses, with a tired but attentive gaze. He looked straight into our eyes, into mine, into hers, as if trying to see not just the facts, but the truth between the lines. "Mr. Bennett, do you understand the purpose of this hearing?" "Perfectly. Someone is trying to throw me out of my own life through the legal door." Celeste's lawyer began his speech about age, forgetfulness, heightened irritability, allegedly unstable emotional reactions. He spoke smoothly, calculatedly. Celeste nodded at the right moments, but her eyes flickered. I waited. My turn. I handed the judge my folder. He flipped through it for a long time. In silence, the pages rustled like footsteps in sand. Then he looked at Celeste. "You claim your father is incapable of making decisions? He confuses dates. Sometimes forgets documents. He's become suspicious. We fear for him. And did it occur to you that he might be suspicious because someone actually is conspiring against him?" Silence. Even the clerk stopped typing. I pressed a button on the remote. The courtroom screen lit up. Video. Scenes from the house. Brian with the papers. Celeste in the study. Their voices. Their plans. All recorded. All time-stamped. The judge didn't interrupt. He watched until the end. Then he removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, looked up at me. "You have a strong case, Mr. Bennett. Very strong. What I see before me is a man who knows exactly what he's doing. A man who has preserved not only his sanity, but his dignity." I nodded. I felt something inside me begin to let go. I don't want to see them jailed. I just want them to know I am not a trophy. I am alive, and I remember. The judge closed the case. The petition denied. Celeste couldn't even rise from her bench. Her lawyer just gathered his papers, avoiding my eyes. As I left the courtroom, one of the women on staff quietly said, "We'd all want a father like that." I didn't answer, just nodded. That was enough. That same evening, I wrote a new will. All property to the grandchildren, but only if they do not live with their parents until the age of 25. The night after the trial was quiet. I sat on the porch, wrapped in the blanket Mary had knitted. My head wasn't buzzing from victory, but from emptiness. Winning in court wouldn't bring back my children's respect, but it gave me back control. And that was enough. The recording of the will began at 9 in the evening. Joe set the camera on a tripod, checked focus, sound, light. Everything was precise, like an army drill. The light fell across my face, highlighting the creases on my forehead and the firmness of my jaw. I didn't smile. This wasn't a show. Recording, Joe said. I looked straight into the lens. My name is Harold Bennett. I was born in 1954. I am of sound mind, clear judgment, and fully understand the consequences of my words. This is my will. I spoke clearly. No tremor. No hesitation. I listed every parcel of land, every car, every tool in the workshop, all of it to the grandchildren, but with conditions. I didn't want my story to repeat. Didn't want anyone else to have to fight for the house while still alive. The inheritance will go to those who do not live with their parents until the age of 25, to those who study, who work, who don't lie or blackmail, to those who remember that respect cannot be forged and that the Bennett name is not a discount. It's a responsibility. At the end, I paused and added, and to my children, I leave this video. Let them see what a man looks like who was nearly destroyed and wasn't. Joe nodded silently, then turned and brought in Peter Gray, who had been waiting in the hallway. Peter came in, took off his jacket, and signed as a witness. He looked at me and said, "This is the most honest will I've ever seen, and perhaps the strongest." I only nodded. Then I opened the old drawer. Inside was an envelope from Mary, unopened. I had kept it all this time. It was her last letter, for a special occasion. My hand trembled as I tore the paper. I read, "Harry, if you're reading this, it means you're standing before a choice. Don't let pain eat away the good inside you, but don't hide the truth either. Our home is not just wood and brick. It's a place where honor must live. If our children forget that, remind them, and if they still don't understand, teach the grandchildren." I sat holding the letter until it was dark. Only one light burned in the house, in the study. I went back inside and placed the letter in the safe, on top of the will. It felt right, like the last stone in a foundation you lay before death. Only I wasn't dying. I was beginning to live as a father, a real one. Joe stepped closer. He held a mug of coffee in his hands. "You know," he said, "you didn't just put down a period. You taught them how to read for real." I smiled. "Now let them decide what to do with the page I've left them." Then I sat back on the porch. The moon hung low, and it seemed as though it, too, understood something that night. The next morning, my grandson Josh left a note on the porch. "I want to stay. Will you teach me how to build?" Josh's note lay on the old carved table by the entrance. Graph paper, written in uneven but firm handwriting. "I want to stay. Will you teach me how to build?" I held it in my hands like fragile glass, not because the paper itself was valuable, but because it was the first honest gesture. No conditions, no masks, just, "Will you teach me?" I didn't call Joe. I went out myself. Josh was standing by the shed where I kept the tools, his back straight, work gloves in his hands. He wasn't playing. He was waiting. "Where do you want to start?" I asked. "With a foundation. Always with a foundation." I smiled. For the first time in many years, a real smile. We started with replacing the boards on the old porch. He held the nails. I hammered. He brought the planks. I measured. Sometimes the other way around. He learned fast. And he was quiet most of the time. That was good. In silence, you can hear what matters. On the third day, he asked, "How did you build this house?" I set down the hammer and sat on the step. 1980, I had just come back from up north. Mary was pregnant. We had nowhere to go, and I said, "Fine, I'll build one." Got a blueprint from the library, then rewrote it. Every nail by hand, every board myself. These weren't just walls. It was our world. And Grandma helped. She held the level when I got stubborn. She always kept the balance. He nodded, then picked up the level and set on a board. "Look, it's off-center. Would you yell?" "No, I'd show you how to fix it, and praise you for noticing." He smirked. "Do you remember when we came here when I was little?" "Of course. You wanted to chop down the tree by the shed because it was looking at you." He laughed. "And so did I. We laugh rarely when we're old. So when we do, it's loud. Joe watched from the window, then came out, brought lemonade, said, "Maybe we should build a new workshop too? Or a tree house," Josh added. "Only if you climb up yourself." I winked. The work went on. Day after day. We didn't talk about Celeste. Didn't talk about Brian. Only about wood, hammers, the weather. I felt the house come alive again. Not from repairs. From meaning. On the 6th day, he picked up the plane himself, smoothed the board, looked at me and said, "What if they come back? Then you'll already be ready, and I'll be here. You're not angry anymore." I looked him in the eyes. For the first time, I didn't see childhood there, but respect. I'm angry, but now it's not poison. It's a tool, a hammer in the right hands. Before bed, I reread his note again, folded it neatly and placed it in the toolbox, between the screwdriver and the tape measure. That's where it belonged. Joe said the note itself was the first brick, not one made of cement, but the one trust is built on. I agreed with him. That morning, a letter arrived from Brian's lawyer. He was demanding a share of the house. In court, the letter came by registered mail. A yellow envelope, the crest of a law firm, the heading, Brian Bennett versus Harold Bennett. I knew this moment would come. Inside wasn't just paper. It was an attempt to repaint history, to make the son the victim, the father the aggressor, to turn me into a monster who had slammed the door on his own blood. I didn't open it right away. I set on the table, brewed coffee, and walked out to the shed. Josh was planing boards. He already knew how to change the drill bits by himself. I said, "It's here, from your father." He didn't answer, just slowed the movement of the plane. But I saw his shoulders tighten. When I came back inside, Joe was already at the table, flipping through the document. His brows furrowed, his face stone. They're not just demanding a share. They're demanding compensation. For emotional distress, for infringement of heirs' rights, for unauthorized management of joint property. They claim you're manipulating your grandchildren, that you isolated yourself deliberately to avoid oversight, that you are unfit to be trusted. I smirked. Unauthorized, is that when you build a house or when you defend it? It's when you still have a conscience, Joe replied. All they have is appetite. And now they want you to apologize on top of it. I called Peter. He arrived 2 hours later. No suit, in jeans, but carrying a case full of documents. We sat at the table like a war council. "We'll respond," he said, "not just with defense, with offense. They strike like predators. We'll strike back like engineers." We drafted the reply. Hard, cold, no emotion, only facts. We attached videos, audio, medical reports, even scans of Mary's letters, photographs of Brian rifling through my papers, transcripts of conversations, Joe's testimony. Peter added, "And let's attach a copy of the will, too. Let them read how you put down periods, and how you teach your grandson to build, not destroy." The documents went out that same day, registered, with confirmation of delivery. We signed every page. Even the paper clips were straight. At sunset, Josh sat beside me. "They'll keep coming, won't they?" "Yes. As long as the house stands, the hunt will go on. This isn't about bricks. It's about power." "And what if one day I become like them?" I was silent for a long time. Then I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Then I'll stand between you and this house. Again, even if you grow taller than me, even if I forget who you are, I'll still know if you start to tear it down. And I'll stop you." He nodded, not like a boy, like a man. And it lifted something from me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sifted through the folder. The paper rustled like sand under boots. Tomorrow, a new battle would begin. But this time, I wasn't alone. I closed the dossier, walked a window, and looked at the light in the workshop. The lamp was still on. Josh was still working. He knew this wasn't just another day. It was the beginning. A week later, the first hearing was scheduled. But in the courtroom, an unexpected witness appeared. My younger brother. The trial took place in the same courtroom where I had already stood once before. Wooden benches, neutral walls, the signed silence above the entrance. But this time the air was different. Heavy, real, because now it wasn't just freedom at stake. It was everything I had built. The house, the name, the memory. I sat beside Joe. Josh had stayed home. I told him, "You've already done your part. Now it's my turn." He nodded, but I knew he would have come if I had let him. But this was my fight. Peter brought a box of documents, a case with flash drives, the dossier, everything laid out in sections, neat and precise. We had rehearsed the arguments the night before, past midnight. I knew every page the way I knew my calluses. When Brian walked into the courtroom, he didn't look my way. His lawyer spoke to him quickly, nervously. I knew that look, insecurity coated with the dust of aggression. His hands trembled, and it wasn't the coffee. The judge was different this time. A woman in her 40s, hair tied in a tight bun, eyes that missed nothing. She began with formalities, then listened to prosecution. They spoke at length, eloquently, but soullessly. Words about threats to property interests, about irrational behavior by the defendant, about manipulating minors. But each word shattered against the wall of facts. Then Peter stood. He spoke dryly, clearly, with pauses in the right places. He laid it all out, point by point. Audio, video, medical evaluations. The will. We had even prepared a timeline of events, day by day. And when it came to the camera recordings, the judge raised her hand and called for a recess. She needed to carefully review the evidence. This wasn't fatigue. This was a sign. She wasn't dismissing. She was analyzing. And that was a good sign. I stepped outside. The air was cold, but inside me burned heat. I braced for a blow. Any blow. But instead, I saw a man I hadn't seen in 25 years. He stood by a tree. Gray jacket, silver hair, hands in his pockets. Tom, my younger brother. Memory hit like a flame. How we built a shed for our grandmother together. How we fought over a bicycle. How we didn't speak for 10 years because I missed his wedding. And then another 15 because he didn't come to Mary's funeral. 2 grudges. 2 stones. And both of us carried them. "Didn't think you'd come," I said. "I didn't think so either. But I read your letter. And I don't want to stay silent anymore." We embraced. Wordless. Like 2 soldiers returning from different fronts. The hug didn't fix the past, but it gave us the chance to stand side by side. Then he pulled out a folder. Documents. Records of our quarrels. Letters where I had asked for forgiveness but never sent. He had gathered it all. His side. My side. He hadn't come to save. He had come to speak. "I'll tell the truth, even if it's inconvenient. Because you're a man who fights, not one who hides." I didn't say anything. Just nodded. Sometimes respect isn't shouted. It's carried in. The judge returned. Announced that the hearing would continue. And Tom would be the first witness. Tom walked into the courtroom with the same stride I remembered from childhood. Straight, firm, nothing extra. As if nothing in his walk had changed in 25 years, except his hair had gone gray and his eyes had grown deeper. He didn't look like a hero, but he didn't look repentant either. He looked like a man who'd come to settle a debt. The judge asked him to state his name and relation to the case. Thomas Bennett, younger brother of the defendant. Pause. Then he looked at me. Not for long. Just a couple of seconds. But it was enough. In those seconds it was everything. Regret, guilt, forgiveness. We didn't exchange a single word, but I knew everything that had been now had a chance not to repeat itself. Brian's lawyer tried to object, claiming the witness couldn't be objective. The judge cut him off. "We haven't yet heard what he has to say." Tom began with memories. How I built this house. How Mary brought us food while I froze in the basement with the cement mixer. How Brian, as a child, tried to sell our toys to the neighbors for a quarter and a sandwich. The courtroom chuckled slightly, but the laughter faded when he got to the heart. Harold was always stubborn, but he was never cruel. His mistakes are the mistakes of a man who wanted to do everything himself. He's no saint, but he's no fraud. He didn't tear the family apart. He held it together even when his fingers bled. He pulled letters from his folder. In them, our quarrels, my remorse, his silence. The letters weren't long, but each one cut like a blade. He read them, and his voice trembled. I was wrong. Forgive me. If you don't come, I'll understand. But know this, I'll always leave you the key to the workshop. He pulled a key from his pocket, showed it to the judge. Metal worn by time. And here I am, with this key, and it still works. The judge silently jotted something in her notebook, then asked, "And what do you want to convey with this testimony?" "That my brother is not an old man lost in his own house. He's a builder, not only of walls, but of boundaries. And if he crossed someone out, there was a reason. And if he let someone in, it's because he saw a chance." Silence. Too long for a courtroom. Peter nodded, as if he'd received more than he'd hoped for. Brian's lawyer shuffled through papers nervously, finding no ground to stand on. The judge turned to me. "Harold, do you have anything to add?" I stood. "Only this. We can rebuild, even from ruins, if there's someone to rebuild with." I sat down, and I realized I wasn't alone. Not in this courtroom. Not in this life. When we walked out, I felt Tom put his hand on my shoulder, like he used to, when we were boys, and he'd lift me up after I fell. "You're holding strong, Harry," he said quietly. "And if you need me, I'm here. Not for a day, for as long as it takes." I nodded. Words didn't come, but they weren't needed. Everything had already been said. Peter looked at us, smirked, and added, "The Bennett family has a solid foundation today." And I understood tomorrow I wouldn't be speaking alone. I would be speaking for those who still build, not destroy. Tomorrow, the final hearing. I must speak last. Everyone will be there. The courtroom was full, not like before, not just with people, but with atmosphere, tension, expectation. Celeste came dressed in black, as if for a funeral. Brian sat with swollen eyes, whether from a sleepless night or meaningless tears. Their lawyers looked composed, but beneath their formality, one thing was clear. They didn't believe in victory. And me? I believed in justice. The judge announced, "The final word goes to Harold Bennett." I stood, not at the podium, from my seat, without papers, without a suit, in the old shirt I had worn when I laid the first brick of this house. I've lived in this house my whole life, built it with my own hands, buried my wife here, saw my children's first steps, their first words, watched them leave, watched them forget. And now, they've come back, not for me, for the house, for its price. Pause. Long. No one breathed. "You want to make me a trophy. An old man who would surrender, so your lives would be easier. But I didn't surrender. I built a defense. I recorded everything. I found my brother. I brought back the truth. I regained respect. I claim my right to remain a man. And I will not let my life be rewritten as long as I breathe." I turned to my children. Direct, without fear. "I loved you, but you left me long before my death. For money, for a piece of land. You thought you could take the walls without realizing. These aren't walls. This is me." Celeste lowered her eyes. Brian looked away. "Revenge? No, this isn't revenge. This is a lesson. Because now my grandchildren will live here. And if you try to come back, they will tell you, no, not out of hatred, but out of memory. Because now they know a home is not a prize. It's a responsibility." I looked at the judge. "I don't want punishment. I want memory. I want this story to remain where the drama was. And for it never to be erased, not even with documents." The judge nodded silently. "Then read the decision. Claim denied. Fully, without right to appeal. All property secured. All accusations dismissed. The will upheld as valid." I didn't smile. I just exhaled, deep, as if, for the first time in years, I allowed myself to lean on my own foundation. When we stepped outside, Josh stood on the courthouse steps. In his hands, the very hammer we had started with, he held it out to me. "Will you build again?" I looked at him, then at Tom. at Joe and said, "No, today I just restored the foundation." We walk home on foot, in silence, but with each step, I felt that the old house no longer weighed me down. It held me up, as it should. When we returned, I went into the workshop, opened the drawer. Inside lay Josh's note. "Will you teach me how to build?" I placed it on top of the will, locked the safe. In that moment, I understood revenge isn't destruction. Revenge is refusing to be erased and remaining yourself until the end. I poured myself a coffee, stepped out onto the porch. The film of sunset lay across the roof like varnish on wood. And for the first time in a long time, I was home, truly home. The story doesn't end with victory, but with meaning. The house remained. The family remained too. Only those who chose to build, not to break. And me? I am no longer a trophy. I am the master. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.